Welcome, everyone, to the first ACC Zoom play reading of the summer. As many of you know, we are New York City's longest continually performing dramatic organization, going now since 1884. While disappointed that our spring major had to be called off, we are so glad to be kicking off this summer series of readings with A Question of Sex by Arnold Bennett. Tonight we have 4 actors prepped and ready to delight and entertain you. Nicole Morris was in A Comedy of Tenors earlier this year, as well as Jules Verne Eats a Rhinoceros. Gro Engelstoft was also in Jules Verne last season and has additionally appeared at our Shakespeare brunch. Eric Kuzmuk has appeared in many productions over the years, including A Night of Chekhov and It's Only a Play. Bobby Costanzo is a newcomer to the ACC stage, but has done backstage work on several shows and done acting work elsewhere. Following the show tonight, there will be a Q&A with the cast. Feel free to put any questions you might have in the Q&A function over the course of the run. Also, keep an eye out for our next production, Sweet and 20 by Floyd Dell, which will be running June 18th through 21st. And without further ado, sit back and enjoy A Question of Sex. George Gower's drawing room. Evening. George Gower is asleep in an easy chair near the hearth. By his side is a fairly large occasional table on which are some writing materials and an empty glass. Enter May Foster and Helen Stanton. They open the door quietly and pause on the threshold to observe the sleeper. They are both in a pleased, gay mood of gentle excitation, but at first they speak low.
The wretch still sleeps.
Yes, a man is a marvelous thing. Such talent in some directions.
Let's wake him now. I should think he's had enough.
Enough? Well, it's 10:07 and he must have dropped off just after lunch. 5 hours.
He hasn't slept much for the last few nights. He's been so frightfully anxious.
Anxious? And what about his poor wife? What about Ada's anxiety? How could he sleep like that when he knew perfectly well?
The 2 young women approach George's chair on tiptoe and indicate to each other by gestures that they will waken him in the orthodox way. Bending down, Helen sniffs at the empty glass.
Whiskey, naturally. Perhaps it would be better if you did it, dear. The privileges of a sister-in-law vary in different families.
What did you say? Do you believe I dropped off for a second? Dash, what a thirst I've got on today.
There.
Well, what are you two staring at? How's Ada now? Has the doctor come yet?
George, it's a girl.
What's a girl? Who's a girl?
It's a girl!
What? I'm damned if this isn't the quickest thing of the kind that I ever heard of.
George, come back. You mustn't go to her. She's asleep.
I am damned. Why, it can't have been a quarter of an hour since I left her.
George Gower, does it not occur to you that these terrible oaths are sadly out of place? Recollect that as a father, you are considerably less than a day old. Blasphemy from lips so young is an instance of infant depravity, such as even I, a district visitor, have seldom seen surpassed. Our curate at Ealing has composed a special form of prayer for young parents. I have brought it over with me, and I shall ask you to make it your own. In the meantime, I beg you not to disgrace the sacred name of father. Think of poor dear Ada. Oh, my darling sister has behaved splendidly. Think of what she has been through.
That's just what I am thinking of, and the more I think, the more I can't...
Why, George, you silly. You've been asleep 5 hours, and it's just...
I swear I haven't.
No more swearing, I entreat. You have been asleep 5 hours. It's turned 7 o'clock, and your daughter is some 3 hours old.
Yes, and everything went off beautifully. Ada cried a bit.
Ada was simply superb.
Yes, she was, dear. She's asleep now, George, and the baby is the loveliest little thing.
The doctor said he never saw a finer.
Yes, and the nurse says so too, and she's got a lot of hair.
And cry, she's got lungs like bellows.
Why didn't you come and wake me up? Answer me. For anything you knew, I might have been doing the most awful things to the sacred name of father during these hours, and quite innocently. Helen, you at least.
Well, I did ask May to go down and sit with you.
But dear, I couldn't have dreamt of leaving Ada.
Oh, why not, dear? I came over specially from Ealing and left my own little ones and Ernest in order to see after Ada myself.
And I came from Harrow, which is much further than Ealing. I haven't any little ones, but if I had, I should have left them too. I'm sure I should. I left Jack and 2 kittens, and there was nothing left to leave.
But it is a question of experience, dear.
Well, I don't know, dear. It seems to me that common sense and a cool head are better than experience.
Oh, but surely, dear, you don't suggest... Oh. We didn't...
Gracious heavens. Do you think the nurse will remember?
Probably not. I've had 3 different nurses myself, and they're all alike. I'll just run up and see to it.
Oh, no. I'll go, dear.
Oh, no, I'll go, dear. Where were the safety pins put?
I know. I will go.
My dear, I really think...
If it's anything serious, hadn't you both better go? Well, further delay might be fatal, and I should like to avoid being cut off in my infancy as a father.
May shall go.
Oh, not at all. I should much prefer Helen to go. She is so experienced.
Pause, and then Helen, pursing her lips and looking as much like a martyred saint as she can, departs.
A girl.
George, what's the matter? I thought all the time that you didn't receive our news with that ecstatic abandonment of joy, which I believe is usual under the circumstances. Why aren't you glad and proud? Why don't you weep happy tears of relief and contentment? Is it possible that you are so lost to all parental feeling as to be indifferent when your wife presents you with a dear little darling baby?
May, you're a very decent soul, but if you say 2 more words in that strain, I'll go upstairs and wring that kid's neck. I couldn't permit any child of mine to be niece to a woman who talked like that. Now, remember that as a father, I have duties, responsibilities.
Oh, you're not well. I see it now. You're suffering. Of course, it must be a great strain on the system to wake up and find yourself a father. Oh, George, forgive my hasty speech. You must take a little nourishment every quarter of an hour till the symptoms pass. Oh, a great strain it was.
Strain? Well, if you knew the strain I've been bearing for months past, well, haven't you noticed the dark rings under my eyes, the unnatural brightness of my orbs, the hectic flush on my cheeks, the bald spot on the back of my head? Strain, my dear sister, I have a secret, and a terrible woe, which, with a courage worthy of an Englishman and a parent, I have shared with none. May, I am undone.
Who has undone you?
My beloved wife. 3 hours since, as I slept. I feared it. I have feared it for many weeks. Listen, 5 or 6 months ago, Uncle Francis said that if I had a son, he would settle £10,000 upon it.
And if a daughter?
He coldly declined to consider the possibility of such a thing. You know, the special brand of ass that he is sometimes. I said nothing to anyone, not even to my wife, for I felt that it would worry her. Imagine my condition of mind, my agonizing suspense. Do you wonder that I've been wakeful night after night? Do you wonder that, from pure weariness and fatigue, I should fall asleep on this, the very afternoon of my undoing? Oh, May, to be a father is not so simple and pleasing as the superficial observer might fancy.
It certainly isn't, especially if you happen to be occupied with being nephew to Uncle Francis at the same time.
Uncle Francis, Uncle Donkey, Uncle Nincompoop, Uncle Booby, Uncle
George!
Bachelor! Pompous old bachelor! Upon my soul, to see the way bachelors behave themselves in these days makes me sick.
Well, don't forget that you were a bachelor yourself less than a year ago.
Only in practice, not in theory, not in theory. I maintain that all bachelors are idiots. Look at Uncle Francis, there's a nice sample. I believe the beggar knew it would be a girl all the time. But in any case, Why can't he keep his precious plan of benevolence to himself till I was actually a father? Then, unless the sex of my child happened to please his fastidious taste, he need have said nothing. I should have been spared all this anxiety, and I should have been no worse off.
Well, George, it is a great pity, of course. I suppose you won't withdraw the condition.
Not he.
Well, after all, you're no worse off. Uncle hasn't robbed you of anything.
Oh, hasn't he? I like that. You aren't a father, May, and you can't enter into a father's feelings. Now, what I feel is that he has robbed me. He's robbed me of precisely £10,000. Here I am, engaged in the arduous and expensive task of founding a family. I see £10,000 within my grasp. The inhuman monster positively dangles it before me, and then, through no fault of mine, I repeat, through no fault of mine, it is snatched away.
Well, never mind, George. You're doing splendidly in your profession. You know you are. And you'll soon have got a large practice together and made £10,000 all of your own. Never mind.
But I do mind. I will mind. I won't be robbed. I absolutely decline to be jockeyed out of a large sum of money on a mere quibble of physiology. The idea is revolting to my legal intellect. Something must be done, and done quickly.
I'm afraid it's a little late, George.
Rot. We must think of something instantly. Uncle Francis is certain to call tonight. I wish he lived in the next hemisphere instead of the next street. That would give us a chance. May, you must help me. I rely on you.
But really, George, I don't see it.
I shall be sure to think of a scheme in a minute or two.
Re-enter Helen.
Hush, I shan't say anything to her. Well, sweet sister-in-law.
That darling is perfectly marvelous. Nurse brought her up to the light just now, and she blinked her little eyes like anything.
No, just fancy, George.
Yes, imagine the intelligence involved in that apparently simple act. That's what you call taking notice, I suppose?
The little pet blinked her ridiculous little eyes several times.
Oh, about how many times?
I dare say you think you're very funny, George.
George, don't be silly. You've no notion of good taste.
Well, she called my daughter's eyes ridiculous. I don't think that was quite in the best taste, especially after an acquaintance of only 3 hours.
Dear Ada is awake now, and she did say she would like to see you for a minute, but I doubt whether in your present mood... Ah, George!
Well?
Be good to her, George, and mind, you must only stay a minute or two. My dear, you had better go with him. We cannot be too careful. And I will just scribble a line to Ernest.
Now, Papa.
Exit George and May.
My love, just a word to let you know that all is well. And Ada has a little girl. Rather weak and puny, I fear, but we cannot expect all children to be as strong as ours. Ada was very brave, but it is fortunate that I came, as no one seemed to have any idea of how to manage. May Foster is very kind-hearted, but so girlish. Shall return Thursday, if I can be spared. Love to the chicks. Don't forget what I told you about going to bed early. With fondest love from your little Nell. P.S. No time for more.
Holding up the letter, enter Francis Gower with hat and stick.
Good evening.
Oh, good evening. I must introduce myself. I am Mrs. Ernest Stanton, George Gower's sister-in-law. You, I feel sure, are Mr. Francis Gower, George's uncle.
Why, delighted to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Stanton. Why, you knew me for a Gower at once, then. Hmm?
Yes, you have the unmistakable Gower eyes, wicked eyes, only more so.
Why, you flatter me.
Flatter you, Mr. Gower, how so? When I see eyes like yours, I always say to myself that their owner has ensured the happiness of some innocent and trusting woman.
Oh, I beg pardon. I am not...
By not marrying her.
Oh, in that sense, I may certainly claim to be the benefactor of your sex. When I review in my mind the vast phalanx of charming women whom I have not married.
You want to know about Ada?
Yes, I thought I would come round and inquire before sitting down to dinner. I was given to understand that there was an expectation, a surmise, a suspicion that,
Well, Mr. Gower, I have good news. Ada has a daughter.
A daughter! How delightful! You said a daughter.
Yes, just after 3 this afternoon. Rather unusual hour.
Indeed. Indeed. I fear I am quite at sea in the minute details of these matters. Are mother and child doing well?
Oh, splendidly, splendidly. My sister has behaved admirable.
Oh, and the child? Well, how did it behave?
Well, Mr. Gower, as you say, you are rather at sea in these matters.
It is so difficult to mold one's inquiries in quite the right form. Now, at funerals, I assure you, I am unimpeachable. I have often been told so. It's a question of practice, I suppose. It is a most singular thing to me, having regard to the alarming increase in our population, how many funerals there seem to be, and how few births. Perhaps that has not occurred to you, Mrs. Stanton?
Indeed not. Quite the opposite, in fact. Did you hear that bell ring?
Distinctly.
That is the 5th time I have rung it at least. These events upset a household from attic to basement.
So far, can I be of any assistance to you?
No. I only want to get this letter posted. If you'll excuse me for 1 second.
Of course, George is in high spirits.
Oh, yes. He conceals his feelings. Men do, you know. They think it's manly.
Fixed it.
Oh, just so. Well, Mother Nature, you with the inscrutable ways. You've saved me £10,000 by this day's work. I reverence you. You're a bit of the right sort. I've got through this safe this time, as it happens. But I must really cure myself of these fits of impulsive generosity. Now, if it had been a boy, I suppose George would actually have expected me to fork out 10,000. And I suppose, like a good-natured ass, I should have done so.
The door bursts open, and George and May enter quickly.
Isn't she a pretty little thing?
Yes, he is. Oh, hello, Uncle Francis.
Good evening, Uncle. Rather warm, isn't it? For this time of year?
You look rather warm, my dear May.
Well, what's the news, Uncle? Been to the city?
No, this is the first time I've been out today. I thought I'd just walk round before dinner to inquire.
To inquire? About what? Oh, yes, of course. You mean about Ada. Well, Uncle, I'm glad to say it's all right, isn't it, May?
Yes, absolutely right. All right.
Ada is doing well, and I am the father of a fine boy.
A boy?
Yes, now come, Uncle, bear up. I know it must be a blow to you, but heavens, what's £10,000 to a man of your fortune? I mean, why, it's less than a fiver to me, isn't it, May?
Yes, George. I think it was noble of you, Uncle, to offer that £10,000, though the actual parting with it to a person of your economic mind cannot fail to be agonizing.
Yes, indeed. When I first heard that my child was a boy, I said, I wish for Uncle's sake it had been a girl. Didn't I, May?
You did, George, you did. You were sitting in that chair and I stood here and you said, I wish for Uncle's sake it had been a girl. Those were the very words you used.
My sympathies went out instantly to you, Uncle. You will have to write a check for £10,000 this very night. Now, personally, I should prefer to consider your offer cancelled, but I feel convinced that you would never consent to such a course. You're a man of your word. You said you would settle £10,000 upon my child if it was a boy. It is a boy, and you will.
You're sure it is a boy?
What? Now, what the deuce? Sure it's a boy? Well, what do you take me for, Uncle?
I take you for the father suffering from some nervous disorder.
You mean I'm a little excited? Well, isn't that natural? You wait till you're a father, Uncle. I bet it'll make you sit up. But fancy you asking me if I'm sure my own child is a boy.
Yes, fancy. Uncle, you should be more careful. To a man in George's delicate condition, so recently a father, anything in the nature of a shock might easily bring about the most serious results.
You are right, my dear little girl. Pardon a rough old bachelor not accustomed to the etiquette of paternity. I suppose you haven't yet decided on a name or names for this marvelous infant.
Well,
Dear Ada was saying only just now that at any rate he must be named Francis. Probably his name will be George Francis, but he will always be called Frankie after you, dear uncle.
Oh, my dear, I am deeply touched by this little mark of consideration.
well, yes, Uncle. Of course, we aren't the sort of individuals that proclaim their private feelings from the housetops, but we think a great deal of you, a great deal. We look up to you. We admire your notion of the duties and responsibilities of a great uncle. And perhaps you'd like to give me the check now, Uncle, and then you won't forget it. If we can once get the check made, he'll never stop it, you know, and we can undeceive him afterwards. Tell him it was a joke and all that sort of thing.
Oh, Uncle Francis, you are a dear old thing.
He is just about to kiss him when the door opens and Helen enters.
Helen, you'd better go upstairs. They've been knocking on the ceiling like anything for the last 5 minutes. I believe they want something.
George, you've had too much whiskey. I've just come from dear Ada.
Helen, this is Uncle Francis. You haven't met before, I think?
Oh, yes, we met a minute or two ago, and I was telling Mr. Gower what a fine little girl Ada has.
Mrs. Stanton, as the head of the Gower family, I feel it my duty to apologize beforehand. You are about to witness what is known as a scene. That is, unless you would prefer to retire.
Oh, not in the least, I assure you.
Not merely a scene, but a family scene, which I believe is the most thoroughly developed form of scene that is known to science.
Pray don't mention it. I am quite accustomed, that is, short of bloodshed, I can stand anything. But I do think bloodshed is horrid.
Well, then, the preliminaries being settled, we may proceed. George, why have you been lying to me?
Lying to you, Uncle?
Lying, Uncle?
I used the word.
Oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean now. I see.
Oh, what eyesight he has.
Well, I was just carried away by one of those sudden impulses that one has. You know, that's what it was, wasn't it, May?
Yes, George, that must have been it. The sort of thing that comes over you, Uncle, before you know where you are.
Comes over me?
No, not you, Uncle. You won't understand, I'm afraid. You're too old. You've got past the age for impulse. It's a disease that comes somewhere between measles and gout. It only affects the younger generation.
I am too old, am I? I belong to the older generation, I suppose. Toothless gums, palsied limbs, a doddering idiot, and so on. Well, if you look as well as I do at 42, sir, you'll be lucky. Damned lucky.
As Ernest often says, the band is beginning to play. I seem to hear the strains in the distance.
42, Uncle!
42?
Sit down, sir.
Well, you called me a liar, but it now occurs to me that I'm not the only one.
Yes, I do call you a liar from the basest, the most mercenary motives. You told me your child was a boy.
Ah, tut, a slip of the tongue. You exaggerate trifles. Besides, for anything I knew, my child was a boy. Now, I admit I had been told it was a girl, but you know what women are, Uncle, especially at these times. Absolutely unreliable. I was merely, as it were, hoping for the best.
Have you not just returned from viewing the body?
Oh, now we're at an inquest?
Well, I saw a kind of vermilion blob surrounded by woolen fabrics, and I was given to understand that what I beheld was a human nose, but before I could satisfy myself even on that minor point, I was told to go, as Ada mustn't be excited.
I hope you'll all acquit me of any desire to take part in the scene, but I do gather, Mr. Gower, that George has attempted to deceive you as to, say, the sex of the offspring.
You do gather, Mrs. Stanton. You emphatically do gather.
George, I'm surprised at you. Really, I am. To think that your poor dear wife should have gone through what she's gone through this day, and you not satisfied, George. George, I blush for you. Then, you are ashamed of your daughter? You wanted a son that you could train up in your own sinful habits of blasphemy, self-indulgence, and deceit. And I can say, I am profoundly glad that it is a girl.
Oh, Mrs. Stanton, so am I. You have a truly noble mind.
What could be the object of such a childish deception? Even you must have foreseen that it couldn't last, that there must come a time when the dreadful secret would reach your good, kind uncle's ears.
I will tell you his object, Mrs. Stanton. As you may possibly have heard, I am an industrious and painstaking person. I work hard and live plainly, and by the exercise of those gifts, which heaven has been pleased to grant me, I have accumulated a fortune. Some would call it a large fortune. I merely call it a fortune. I dare say I am worth £100,000. Now, you might imagine that possessing this and a clear conscience, I am happy. But there is another and darker side to the picture, which I am endeavoring to paint, Mrs. Stanton. I am cursed, continually cursed, in spite of what George is pleased to consider my advanced age, with an impulse, the impulse of unrestrained generosity. Acting under this impulse, about 6 months ago, when George imparted to me the information that Ada, when I say George imparted to me the information, I said, George, if your child is a boy, I will settle 10,000 on him. You see, boys are so helpless. A boy can't marry a rich husband, can't make his own clothes, can't, if the worst comes to worst, go out as his mother's help. That is why I said, if it is a boy, I will settle £10,000 on your child. I was under no obligation to make the offer. I acted from pure impulse, the impulse of absurd generosity. And now, how does George repay me? By lying to me, and what is worse, getting his sister to lie to me. Bah, you, Mrs. Stanton, with characteristic insight and common good sense, have at once put your finger on the most despicable aspect of this painful affair. The lie was useless, futile, silly.
George, did your wife know of your uncle's offer?
No, I kept it from her. I thought it would worry her.
That's perfectly true, Helen. He said so himself to me.
I do not approve of secrets between husband and wife. It would have been better if you had told dear Ada.
But what difference could it have made? Uncle only made the offer because...
Oh, one never knows. Oh, George.
And as for you, May, you have pained me beyond expression.
Now, as I've been dragged into this little, shall I say, difficulty, let me end it for you. I always think it's such a pity to allow a quarrel to grow. One should stamp it out in the bud. George, and you May, you must beg your uncle's pardon. I am sure he will grant it.
Willingly.
Oh, very well then. If there is to be such a fuss about a mere nothing, a momentary forgetfulness excusable, I should have thought in a man suffering the first pangs of fatherhood. I beg pardon. I apologize. I grovel.
Well, if Uncle can take any pleasure in the self-abasement of a fellow creature, and that fellow creature a woman, I also grovel.
There, there. That's all right. Shake hands. There. It's all done with and forgotten. A little tact I've invariably found is all that is necessary in these affairs, and I'm sure I am very glad to have been of assistance. And now, Uncle Francis. I may call you Uncle. You will write out the check.
The check.
Oh, the check for £10,000.
The check for 10,000. Whatever are you?
You surely are not going to withhold it, especially after George and May have apologized so prettily. You surely aren't going to cast a slur, as it were, upon my niece and my poor dear sister, who has behaved so splendidly today.
Well, yes, you surely aren't going to, Uncle.
My dear uncle, you surely aren't going to.
George, is your child a boy or is it not?
I'm informed that he isn't. She isn't.
Well, then, upon what possible ground can you claim my £10,000? Allow me to remark that I have not the slightest intention of parting with it.
Mr. Gower, I am deeply disappointed in you. Common humanity alone.
Uncle, you have pained me beyond expression.
My poor wife, an innocent babe.
Great wealth may be to its owner a blessing or a curse. Alas, I fear too often the latter. It hardens the heart, blunts the finer susceptibilities, and transforms into a fiend what under more favorable circumstances might have been a human being. I've noticed the same phenomena given in my own children when Ernest gives them sixpence.
By Jove, it's 8 o'clock. I shall be late for dinner.
Oh, yes, that's it. Go and consume dainties out of season and drink expensive wines while your own flesh and blood eat the bread of sorrow. Center all your thoughts on yourself. Shut your eyes to the grief and suffering which surround you. Think only of the carnal appetite. There is the rich man all over.
Trample on us. Drag the juggernaut of your gold across our defenseless bodies. What is the shriek of pain, the moan of anguish to you, so long as your millions increase and multiply?
Now, Helen, you see my uncle, my so-called uncle, in his true colours.
I do, George, I do. And I cannot bear the sight. I will go to my poor sister, who is to be robbed of £10,000 for a mere indiscretion. I must try to comfort her as best I can. It will be a fearful shock to the poor thing. It might kill her. But of course, she must be told.
Oh, true. The news may kill her, but as you say, she must be told.
I will do my best to comfort her. I cannot say more. We must hope for the best.
Ah, Her you may comfort, but who shall pour balm into the wounds of my defenseless child, whose career is blasted, so to speak, before it's cut its first tooth?
You may well ask, George, but you ask in vain. Wealth has no ear for the wail of an infant. Wealth is preoccupied with its dinner.
Uncle, are you quite determined?
Yes, May, I fear I am. And I insist on being allowed to depart.
Oh, go.
Go.
Don't let us keep you from your past.
Now, possibly, and I say possibly, I may repeat my offer. If at some time in the future, George, you have, or that is, I should say, Ada should have a boy. I have noticed that some parents have large families in which both sexes are represented. Yes, sir.
A frail hope, a hope probably delusive. Our dear curate at Ealing has 9 daughters.
I thank you, Uncle, but I have no expectation of being able to avail myself of your offer. Helen, we must resign ourselves.
We must.
Yes.
But do not let us bear spite, Mr. Gower. We freely forgive you. Personally, I shall pray for you.
Yes, Uncle. We feel it our duty to forgive you, and dear Helen will pray for you.
Before leaving, Mr. Gower, you must really come upstairs and see the baby. She's a charming little creature. If we could just get him upstairs.
I do not doubt it, but I would really prefer to be excused.
But Ada said to me specially that you were to go up. She wants you dreadfully to see her baby, her firstborn. You must feel how heavy the little dear is.
I shall be charmed to, when it's a little bit bigger.
Surely you will not disappoint, dear Ada. Surely you will not bear malice.
I would rather...
Come along, Uncle, we'll all go.
Yes, we'll all accompany you. You needn't be afraid.
Well, not tonight. Some other time.
Oh, come on.
No, George, I will not. The 2 great rules of my life are never to enter a sick room and never to handle babies. And you ask me to break them both at once.
Oh, stuff.
The man's shy, actually. Make him come, George.
No, George, I entreat. I once handled a baby.
Well,
Well,
I dropped it.
did it die?
No. I have sometimes wished that it had.
who was it?
It was you, George, and your mother fainted.
Oh, you dropped me, did you? Was I injured for life? Maimed? Crippled?
Well, happily not.
A jolly good thing for you. I'll teach you to drop me and make my mother faint. Come on now.
Excuse me. I pray you to excuse me. I'd give a good deal to be out of this.
How much would you give?
Would you give a lot?
Would you give £10,000?
Oh, I feel it coming.
What?
It's my impulse of extravagant generosity, my terrible charitableness. Oh, there, oh no.
Perhaps pen and ink would assuage the agony?
Perhaps.
They lead him to a table. He sits down and pulls checkbook out of his pocket. May hands him the pen. He begins to write. Reading over his shoulder.
Pay George Gower £10,000. Now, the signature.
Understand. I don't have to see that baby till it's 6 months old. And I don't have to handle it until it's a year. No, 2 years old.
George nods, all smiles. Francis signs with a flourish. tears check out of book and hands it to May. May hands it to George, who receives it in ecstatic silence. Francis heaves a profound sigh. Curtain.